Something a little bit special from FolkScape Live today here at the Sidmouth Folk Festival. Martin Carthy has been singing professionally since 1960. Very few people are as big an influence on the folk scene as he. And he is also, of course, the patron of this festival. He's going to be on stage talking to Jon Wilks, himself a fairly significant figure in the folk scene. And we're going to be having a look at that a little bit later. First of all, I'm just going to ask Jon what he's going to ask Martin. Jon, welcome. Thanks very much for talking to us.
Thanks, Hugh. Nice to be here.
Why is Martin such an important, significant figure, and why is it worth knowing what he has to say?
So I always think that Martin is, and I don't mean this in any way derogatory fashion, but he's probably the most influential musician I can think of that most people have never heard of. So if you were to walk down the street and ask your average person in the street who Martin Carthy was, it's likely that they don't necessarily know, unless you're in Sidmouth where everybody knows. But I think if you were to point out to them the fact that he was an influence on Bob Dylan, huge influence on Paul Simon, huge influence on musicians who were interested in what we call folk music since then you can see that in some way he has his fingers in so many pies. I was talking to him last night about the fact that there's a recent interview out with Johnny Marr from the Smiths, who said that when he formed the Smiths, his idea was basically to do what Martin Carthy does, but just at double the pace. So you could argue that Martin Carthy is responsible for the Smiths, is responsible for parts of Blur, is responsible for all those sort of indie guitarists from the 90s who were into the idea of picking rather than sort of shredding and strumming. Incredible.
Give us a very brief musical biography of Martin.
So Martin, he was born in London, and well, he was born just outside London actually, but he grew up in London, in the Hampstead area, and he started playing, as you say, in around 1960 in the coffee bars, on that sort of skiffle scene really, and he was heavily involved in those early days, those early sort of folk scene formations. He was involved in the Singers Club, Ballads and Blues Club. So all these, if you dig into your sort of folk history, you start to find that these were significant places. Les Cousins, another club that he sometimes played at, and he was just there at the start of it all. And he was also, as people started to become interested in, people had become interested in this country, certainly in American blues and American music, and people like Martin were the first to sort of start looking at English traditions as a way to sort of start exploring, what went before, rather than sort of focusing entirely on America, as so many people were in those rock and roll years, blues. Yeah, he was heading up to Cecil Sharp House, and he was digging into the archives there and finding out what was done. And I've got to go on stage with him for 75 minutes and condense 63 years into that, which I've just worked out is probably around 1.14 years per minute. So there's a lot to talk about.
Good luck, Jon. Quick interviews are an art. You mentioned that picking style of guitar playing, which is so important, rather than just power chords or anything like that. Yes. But utterly confusingly to those of us who are aspirant guitarists, he tunes his guitar like some bizarre alien instrument.
He does. The Carthy tuning is a thing. It's so many guitarists. Again, just for those people that don't necessarily know what we're talking about, a guitar is usually tuned in a standard way that most people who pick up a guitar will learn how to play, and that would be E, A, D, G, B, E. So I'm so used to messing around with his tuning at the moment, I can't remember. But what Martin worked out was, and not just Martin, it has to be said, guitarists of his generation, people like Davy Gray and Bert Jansch, these people were experimenting with different ways to tune a guitar that gave them different voicings, I suppose. Martin famously spent a whole night sitting trying to work out the perfect tuning, which, I've just realised that's something that we should put into today's conversation on stage, and there's just so much to talk about.
Well, I won't take away any, provide any spoilers. I don't want to tread on your feet when you get in there. But the final thing is he's a bit of a patriarch of a dynasty, the yes. Carthy-Watson connection.
Yeah.
We saw Eliza playing in the festival earlier on. It talent comes in genes, doesn't it? It must be genetic.
Well, it seems to be. I think naturally there's a talent there, and it comes from, if we're referring to Eliza, it comes down through Martin, it comes down through Norma. I think as much as having that natural talent, though, what you get when you spend time with Martin is this overwhelming sense of enthusiasm. That these songs are the be-all and the end-all. And Eliza must have grown up with that, and I think that's as important as the talent. It's that absolute single-minded passion for preserving the tradition in some way.
Jon, I won't keep you any longer. I'll let you go in there and we'll hear that wisdom from Martin himself. Thank you very much for taking it out of him, though. Thanks so much, Jon.